Okay, hello, good evening. My name's Farrell Hoy-Janab. I am the Faculty Development Coordinator at JCCC, which means I love my job because I get to know about what all of our great faculty members are doing all over campus in all different areas. This program, the College Scholars Program, is great because some of the community and some of you get to find out about some of those things. The purpose of JCCC's College Scholar Program is to showcase faculty excellence in research fields that go beyond the classroom to make scholarly contributions to knowledge within the professor's academic discipline. So we award 4 of these a year, and each recipient receives a $2,000 stipend. So Terri is our first College Scholar this year. We have 3 more coming up on December 5th. Jeffrey Oden, Professor of Environmental Science, will give a talk called Understanding Water Issues in Kansas for a Sustainable Future, which is a very important topic, I'm sure we all agree. On January 30th, Mark Harvey, Professor of Political Science, will give his talk called Celebrity Influence, Politics, Persuasion, and Issue-Based Advocacy. So his research is about celebrity and politics, also very timely. Finally, on March 28th, Jim Leiker, Professor of History, will give his talk, Rage of the Rural Minority, Farmer Activism, and the Great Plains Farm Crisis of the Late 20th Century. And I think I've heard snippets of this lecture here and there, and it's really fascinating, a really good one. And I also would note that Dr. Leiker is, I think, the founder and creator of the College Scholars Program, and it's really nice that now he can serve as one of the scholars, so he's right there. So on to tonight, Dr. Terri Easley-Giraldo is a professor of speech and debate in her 13th year at JCCC. I think I've known her since fairly early on when she came here from a few conversations at Barley's on a Friday night. And I remember being very impressed with what she was doing with the debate team at that time. And I've just watched her. It's been enjoyable to watch her career evolve as time has gone on, and her research focuses on women, and I know that she's an excellent role model for the young women that she encounters in her classes every day. So she started at JCCC as the debate coach, as I mentioned, and rebuilt the debate team for her first 6 years at the college, finishing her tenure with back-to-back national community college debate championships in 2010 and 2011. She then retired from debate in 2011 and focused on her doctoral work and enhancing her intercultural communication class with various international travels, including professional development workshops and faculty exchanges to Russia and the Netherlands. In the past 4 years, she has presented 17 papers at regional, national, and international conferences. She was selected to be on a top paper panel at the National Communication Association Annual Conference, and was also competitively selected to present at the International Communication Association Conference in San Diego last May. Number 3 is a lucky number for Terri. This is her 3rd time as a JCCC College Scholar. She's won the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Award 3 times, and also the Distinguished Service Award 3 times. Her bachelor's is in Literature and Communication from the University of Texas at Dallas. Her master's is in Communication from Baylor University, and she graduated in May 2016 with her Ph.D. in Communication Studies from KU, with her dissertation titled Global Sojourners, Women's Political Efficacy and Political Ambition in the Face of Political Cynicism and Gender Barriers, which is the basis for her talk tonight. And this morning when I noticed that today is International Girls' Day, I thought that was very timely. We didn't plan it that way, but it's a nice bit of serendipity. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Terri Easley-Giraldo.
I wish I could take credit for it being on International Girl Day, but it was really just the luck. It was meant to be. So thank you all for coming tonight. There's a few special people I'd like to thank. First, Farrell, for everything that she does to make this program go well. We're very lucky to have her in this role, so thank you so much, Farrell. I want to thank the women who are part of my project for allowing me to share their stories with you today. While most people complain about their dissertation topics and say they never want to touch it ever again, I can honestly say that every time I reread it and re-get to the project, I'm really excited, and it's always a fun thing to do. I have a few special people in the audience tonight I would like to thank real fast. My first is my Ph.D. advisor, Dr. Mary Banwart, is here tonight. Without her guidance, this would have just stayed a project that I thought, hey, this is really cool. I want to talk to these women from different countries. But she really helped me guide and focus it into my dissertation. So thank you, Dr. Banwart. To all my colleagues across campus, thank you for your support. I was a stressed out graduate student while working full-time for 4 years, and many of you listened to me at Barley's or other places and really helped survive those years. And last but definitely not least, I want to thank my husband Mario, who's here in the audience today. Our first 2/3 of the time he's known me, I've been a crazy, stressed out graduate student who worked full time, so kudos to him for dealing with me. So, with all that being said, I will start with today's presentation. Scholars studying gender and politics have focused on a variety of topics over the decades, with one of the most frequently asked questions is, why do so few women participate in politics? Women in American politics have made increasingly small strides over the years, but the question still remains, why are more women not involved in politics? Research on American women shows that American women tend to be more cynical about politics, less interested in politics, less knowledgeable about politics, and less willing to run for political office than their male counterparts. Few studies have studied the non-Western perspectives in relation to political participation, knowledge, and interest, and even more specifically, none exist studying a young female cohort in a non-Western framework. I was curious to see if the same trends would be present for women in different countries. Specifically, the countries I'm going to talk to you today are deemed by the US State Department as being at risk for women's issues. We could easily spend a whole hour talking about political cynicism in the United States, which would be very fun to do. But instead, I think this would be a lot more interesting to talk about. So let's start by talking exactly what political cynicism is. And while most of the literature comes from a Western perspective, I use this as the framework to evaluate the women's discourse. Cade, McKinney, and Tedesco define political cynicism as the feeling that the government in general and the political leaders in particular do not care about the public's opinions and are not acting in the best interest of the people. This political cynicism can be divided into 3 areas. First is the lack of trust. This could be lack of trust in the system, lack of trust of the politicians. The second would be purpose. I don't think the government does anything. I don't trust that it's going to act in my best interest. And then also the effectiveness of the government. They can't get anything done. They don't do anything. They're just kind of talking a lot. The second would be corruption. The political system's corrupt, bribery, the politicians are corrupt, everything's kind of corrupt in its own way. And then the third would be the feeling of powerlessness, is that I can't do anything about it. I'm only one vote, I'm only one person, I can't do anything, the system is what it is. So before we go further, I wanted to talk about the countries of this project. I developed an acronym which I refer to as MAMIA-PEZ for the 7 countries, I know it's kind of fun to say 10 times, which includes the countries Mongolia, Morocco, India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Egypt, and Zambia. We struggled with how to talk about these 7 countries because they're not geographically in one area, and I didn't like the term developing countries, and I didn't like calling them international women, so I use this acronym when I refer to all of them as a whole when I talk about the 7 countries. And I want to point out that I don't try to homogenize them or group them together. Rather, I like to talk about the nuances of the different women's perspectives and the different discourses that they do throughout. So my dissertation had 2 main research questions. The first was, how do young women from MAMIA-PEZ discursively frame the barriers that exist for political participation in their country? And then the second was, how do women from MAMIA-PEZ discursively construct their ability to participate in politics? MAMIA-PEZ women generally constructed cynicism and gender barriers as the barriers that exist for political participation. But in this talk, I'm just going to focus solely on their constructions of political cynicism and how that motivates potential future behaviors. The participants in the study were part of the Kansas Women's Leadership, which is known as the KWLI, that's hosted at the University of Kansas, and is funded by a US State Department grant. 58 total women participated in this project throughout 3 years, from 2013, 14, and 15, which are held each summer. And all women participate except the exception of 1 woman, which led to the 58 total interviews. The ages ranged from 18 to 25. These are all women that were enrolled in college in their home countries during their participation. I ended up with 58 total interviews. The average time of the interviews was about 18 minutes. The longest was 38 minutes. Some were long-winded and some were shorter, were more 10 minutes, which resulted in 18 total hours of interviews for the 3 years, which then I transcribed, which resulted in 234 pages of single transcription. I know, it's a lot of fun. Single-spaced transcriptions. I then used a software called Navivo to code the interviews, and the coding went through several stages. The first was just an open coding to get a feel for the interviews and develop very broad codes. Then after that, I did axial coding, which refines the codes and creates categories. And then after the categories, we want to go back again, and themes emerge. The three themes that emerged as part of this data were gender barriers, cynicism, and political efficacy and ambition. Tonight, like I said, I'm going to talk about cynicism, and a short plug for next week on Thursday, the 19th, at 11 a.m. in the CoLab, I'll be talking about political efficacy and ambition and how the women talk about their political ambitions or lack thereof. So cynicism was the most frequently mentioned theme, with 56 out of the 58 participants making some kind of cynical reference throughout their interview, which led to a total of 236 total references to cynicism, which dominated all the other themes pretty much. Participants were asked various scale questions to measure their levels of cynicism and political efficacy. One asked if they have trust in the political system. For those of you who love numbers, the mean was 3.78, and the vast majority, 70.7%, which was 41 participants, indicated low levels of their trust in their political systems. Another evaluation of the participant cynicism asked whether they believe that politicians care about what their citizens think. The mean was 3.88, and a rather strong percentage, 74.2, which was 43 participants, expressed they did not think that politicians cared what women thought. And the final measure of cynicism asked participants whether they perceived the government was complicated and if they could understand what was going on in their political systems. The mean was 2.26, with the majority of participants, 67.3, 39 participants, agreeing with the statement that politics is complicated and sometimes they cannot understand what's going on. So, as you can see, the majority of participants expressed very high levels of political cynicism towards the government and a very low level of trust in politics and their political systems. I labeled this theme diplomacy and sugarcoating, as you'll see some of the discursive constructions that the women made through this. And through this, 4 sub-themes emerged, which was corruption, dishonesty, and distrust, broken promises, the lack of transparency, and then there was some unique tensions with optimism that we'll talk about as well. So we'll look at these sub-themes individually, and I'll share some of the women's stories with you. The most articulated motivation by participants was their cynicism, was the existence of corruption, dishonest politicians, and an overall lack of trust of the political system. Corruption overwhelms the participants' responses and motivates their overall cynicism as they view their system as broken and one that is very hard or impossible to rid of corruption. Participant 32 from India was asked if barriers exist to be knowledgeable about politics, and she answered, yes. The first thing is when you say politics in my city, what they say is politics is corrupted. When you say politics, the word that comes to mind is corruption. They don't say politics is a group of people working to make a better life for the public. They just don't say that. And the other thing is that it's becoming more complicated day by day, so people are just not interested. They keep saying we have this problem and we have that issue and you need to resolve that issue, but most of the time there are no actions taken unless you're in an election. So people are just fed up with what's going on because it's the same thing going over and over again. It's a vicious cycle. They provide us with things, the election goes on, and then they don't do it again. For participant 32, corruption is the defining word to describe what politics is in India, which highlights her cynical view of associations with the government. The cynicism is also highlighted by her remark that people are just so fed up with what's going on, which describes her coping mechanism and many of the other women's as just disengaging from politics. I don't want to be involved in it, it's awful, I just disengage from the system. Participant 34 from Zambia explains why politics is not interesting to her personally. She says, in my country, there's a level of dirty politics where they don't attack people based on issues that are happening, but they make personal attacks. And if it was women who are in politics, you find that media will only put them on the front page if there's a picture of them doing something inappropriate or something like that. It's just dirty politics. For participant 34, dirty politics is seen as personal attacks on a person. The personal attacks are also furthered by the attention that the women get because they're only positioned on the first page if they are doing something that's deemed as inappropriate. For participant 39, she talks about the desire to create change, but not wanting to be in the political system. She says, I'd want to be in political office if I was part of change or a political project that can really make change and make a difference in my country and help out people suffering from all this political drama. And I wouldn't want to be in political office just because of all the drama they've already created. I hate it, seriously. She shares that she was very serious about that. She shares that she wants to create change, but her cynicism is expressed through statements that it's difficult or almost impossible to create any kind of change. Instead of participation in politics, Mamiya Pez women express their desire to work in public or civil service or through non-governmental organizations, NGOs. For them, change is best facilitated through social activism and community organizations because politics is undesirable due to the drama, and she declaratively says, "I hate it." Participant 49 talks about the cynicism manifested through the constructions of distrust, where participants describe politics as a loss of loyalty and a loss of faith. So this kind of metaphor of loss. She says, "I think politics is just a mess. The people have no loyalty, and I don't know why maybe I just don't know about other countries. In Mongolia, most of the parliament members are just for making money and for the authority. They are not there for the country." For her, politics is described as this mess, which again constructs politics as an undesirable thing that she does not want to be part of. While not explicitly saying that she doesn't want to be part of it, the description of mess implies that it's not something that she would want to be part of, because most of us don't go get ourselves into messes. We try to stay away from them. So she also describes politicians as no loyalty, which she explains as politicians only focusing on their self-interest and not the overall good of the country and its citizens. This symbolic construction of loss is also explained by participant 54, who's from Morocco. She says, "I think I just lost faith, not only about this political government, but about the ones in the past and the government that will come. I may sound very negative about it all, but this is how I feel. I think that better work will come not from the government, but from the people and organizations." Not only has participant 54 lost faith in the current government, but she expressed that this has happened both in the past and future governments. Her description of complete loss of faith identifies her cynicism towards the government and her complete withdrawal from politics. She also points out that she believes that people and organizations, not the government, are the impetus for change. Lying is articulated as a facet of corruption and dishonesty. Participants explain as the impetus for their cynicism. Participants uniquely distinguish general lying politicians, ones that partake in election practices where bribing occurs, and politicians make promises that they do not follow through once they are elected. This excitement that's garnered through elections seems to quickly fade when politicians fail to carry out their plans and promises, and has negative consequences that for the women created this cynicism and apathy. Participant 45 from India says, "The interesting thing is the hype of the election. When I was in school, the teachers would always talk about it. That's the most interesting part. The not interesting part is corruption. They don't serve the people. They use the people. They use the ignorance of people in many ways. They misuse the trust, they buy votes. Democracy is lost here." She explains that for her, the interesting part is the elections because of all that goes on in the elections. But the negative aspect is the corruption, and the politicians use the ignorance of the people in order to get what they want and then not fulfill their promises. Participant 18 also articulates this distrust of politicians, and she says, "In my country, it is interesting to see the new ways that they corrupt people. How people brainwash, and what we do is see is that the elections, that people are very loud. They become very good orators. They say we will do this, and we'll make a great difference, and they are just speeches. I think not interesting is that a lot of speeches, a lot of talk, but in the end, they just aren't doing anything." Corruption, again, is described as the main action by participant 18. She says that elections are a time where promises are made, but then they're just good orators. So her cynicism is depicted as them giving a lot of talk, but never following through on their actions. Bribing is also described by participants as a justification from their abstinence of political participation. Participant 17 from Morocco explains, "I don't vote. I don't trust. It's all the same story. They never change anything. Imagine what they are doing in Morocco. They give money, they give food to people to vote for them. And why do people vote for them? He's my brother or my father's friend, so I have to vote for them. It's not like he deserves or she deserves or they will make some kind of change and help us live in a better place, but once someone who deserves is there, I will vote for them." The justification for participant 17 not voting is driven by cynicism and that nothing can change her political system. She illustrates this absurdity of elections, that we vote for people, they vote for people just because they know them and not that they are qualified. Which is interesting because she does say at the end this optimism that she may participate in the future if she feels someone is qualified, but that expresses that tension with the beginning of her statement that says it's the same story over and over again. Participants also articulate a frustration with the lack of transparency that exists for acquiring political information, as previously mentioned during elections, but also more generally throughout the government's operations. While information is given through the media, participants criticize the reliability of the media's information. We all know we can relate to that, as well as the general smokescreen that exists around politics. When asked if barriers existed to becoming knowledgeable about politics, participant 27 from Morocco answers, "The first barrier in our country is the lack of transparency. The big projects and decisions, we just get the final copy. We do not know about the procedure. It stays in the parliament. Even in the Constitution, there are some clauses about transparency, and the government should show the public what happens and how they get to those decisions and justify those positions to the people. It remains a political game. If you want to know the truth, you should go there. And even going there, you will be confused. Because I tried, and I was really, really confused. It's complicated." Participant 27 argues that the first barrier to acquiring knowledge is the lack of transparency in the government. She explains that they may get the final decision, but they don't know the process in which they arrived at that decision. Transparency is specifically mentioned in her country's constitution, which is pretty unique, as an obligation of the government to the citizens, but she maintains that they still play this political game because no one knows what's happening behind the closed doors. Participant 2 from India echoes these statements and the lack of transparency in the government and says, "Ignorance is bliss, and that may be something the government thrives on. Due to lack of transparency, there might be a proliferation of bad governance that hampers knowledge sharing. Lack of knowledge leads to bad governance." She recites this common phrase, "ignorance is bliss," several times in her comments and argues that the government benefits from this belief of the citizens. Because of the lack of transparency, the participant 2 explains that bad governance is a result. The citizens' lack of knowledge for the government allows them to continue this bad governance because they're unable to hold the government accountable for their actions. The smokescreen and lack of transparency can also be served to completely mask what's going on in the government. Politicians benefit from this smokescreen as it hides what's happening behind closed doors, but the negative consequences of this breeds apathy and the cynicism. Participant 41 from Afghanistan explains, "Sometimes, not actually sometimes, I would say all the time," and she stressed all the time, "that they show that people not what the real thing is. There is a different thing going on, a different scene going on back, which civilians do not get to see. That is what politics is about. It's about diplomacy and sugarcoating the facts and the negative parts, so that it's hard to sometimes understand what's really going on." For participant 41, the information is not the real thing. She argues that there's different actions happening behind closed doors that they are not aware of. She expresses this view that her government is sugarcoating the facts, which is a barrier to acquiring political knowledge and continues to breed the cynicism. Participants did blame the media for contributing to the lack of transparency about getting political information. When asked if barriers existed, participant 23 from Afghanistan said, "Yeah, because of the media. The media is not so much helpful. They are not revealing the picture of politics, and everyone knows that the system has corruption, and this is the other part that prevents us from having full knowledge, which is the obstacle to really know what's going on." She argues that the media is to blame as a barrier to gaining political knowledge because they are not very helpful, she says. Corruption is viewed as an expected part of the media, politics, but yet the media does not highlight that or kind of bring to light what's going on. They are kind of complicit within the corruption that's existing. Participants did express cynicism towards the government, and then in the same remark would also express optimism, which highlights the ongoing tension between cynicism and optimism through the participants' discourse. Participant 41 from Afghanistan describes, "The interesting part is that you're able to speak your thoughts and your mind. And you have the platform and opportunity, and sometimes you have the authority to assert your thoughts and actions. The negative point is no matter how hard you try to stay away from all the bad parts of politics, you are not who you are." For her, politics allows this platform of opportunity to express oneself, which is the positive aspect of politics. The optimistic view of politics that they can make change, but then quickly shifts to a cynical view that you cannot stay away from the bad aspects of politics, no matter how hard you try. And she highlights the bad and argues if you get into it, then you can't be who you are because politics corrupts you from that. Participant 43 from Morocco expresses a similar view. She said, I would like to be in political office because I can translate the issues of my community to some actions if I am there, whether it's laws or activities or actions or changing and agreeing on stuff. The important thing for me is the vehicle of public opinion. While I'd not like to be there, it's because it's not so clean and has a lot of hidden agendas and stuff. I don't want to be involved in this, and I just want to be there to help if there's something to do. She explains that she wants to be in politics because of the possibility for her to do something for her community, but her actions are described through a variety of possibilities that can enhance the issues they face. But since the political system is not clean, in her opinion, it's not something that she necessarily wants to be part of. So as you can see that from the Mamiya Pez women's remarks, cynicism is the underlying justification for their responses as the most frequently reoccurring theme throughout the interview. And the 4 sub-themes kind of show the different motivations for why they are so cynical. This study revealed a nuanced understanding of how Mamiya Pez women discursively construct cynicism. So what all does this mean? Banwart argues that political cynicism can negatively impact young voters' future behaviors. This is especially important for Mamiya Pez women because the potential impacts of cynicism on their constructions of political behaviors in their countries. Instead of a passive act of avoidance and just simply not being involved, this study showed that they express apathy and an active avoidance. They would say, it's so bad that I stay completely away from it, I don't touch it, I don't want to be around it, which has implications for that because it results in a loss or less female representation in politics. One particular interesting thing for me throughout the dissertation was their distinction between politics and civil service. The Mamiya Pez women articulate this difference between politics and civil service, and why politics is this undesirable place that they do not want to be part of. They would articulate that civil service was something that they would want to be part of. It allowed for more change and more community involvement. So while Mamiya Pez women do not have political efficacy overall because of their cynicism, they do possess civil service efficacy and have interest in contributing to their communities. So maybe instead of being so focused on government activities, we should then explore what role women can play in civil service to create their environment. And does this potential in civil service allow them to make more opportunities and more positive changes in their communities? While this study demonstrates some important findings, there are a number of limitations that I should note. Many of the limitations deal with the sample's demographics. This was a convenient sample. I used women that were part of the KWLI, so they were selected by the U.S. State Department. So religion and class are 2 of the most significant limitations, and those are important intersections to understanding political knowledge and interest and ambition. However, I did not specifically ask them their socioeconomic status or religion. They would mention it maybe casually, and it probably would have been beneficial to kind of have that, but I did not collect that as part of the survey. An additional limitation is the level of education of the participants. All of the participants are currently enrolled university students, which acknowledges that they have access to education that many women in their countries do not have. Education, we know, privileges women, but we do not know to what degree this occurs, especially in Mamiya Pez. Women who feel more efficacy about politics have more tools of education to participate, where the vast majority of their peers do not have the same opportunity. Mamiya Pez women have self-selected to apply in this leadership institute, which suggests that they have a greater interest to be involved in their communities. Additionally, the study leads to further questions such as, does education magnify corruption? It's possible that the more knowledge women gain, the more that they are aware of the corruption, and it fosters more cynicism, whereas one might speculate that non-educated women may be more accepting of their lack of role in their political system because they're not fully aware because of the education. So while this information can be a bit depressing, we're cynical, they're cynical, we're all cynical, and so are Mamiya Pez women. I want to leave you with a quote that does inspire me. And I was a little overambitious. I thought the quotes would take a lot longer. So we'll have lots of time to discuss, so that's good. I want to leave you with a quote that does inspire me. While these women express cynicism in their political systems, it does not diminish their desire to change or help their communities, which is evidenced by their participation in this Leadership Institute. While we have not entirely answered the question, and I'm not sure anyone ever has, hopefully they will, of why Kirkpatrick says so few women enter politics, the study does provide a deeper understanding for Mamiya Pez women of why they do not or how they view politics in their countries. Knowing these 58 amazing women and having the opportunity to get to know them and learn from them, I want to end with this quote from Margaret Mead that says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Thank you. So we have lots of good time for questions. I think one of the things I struggled with was a lot of the dissertation is all kind of intertwined, so I was trying to keep part of it for Thursday without dabbing too much into the efficacy part. So yeah, any questions that you may have? Farrell.
Well, I was really interested in that they did feel advancing civic engagement. And I was thinking about how maybe in the United States, before women had the right to vote, they really empowered through civic engagement. Other than political. And do you think that in the United States today, women play a larger role? Does it translate?
To women playing a more role in the civic. You know, I think most would argue probably that women are more involved in the civic sphere. They tend to be in the lower roots and things like that. Although we're starting to see that filtration upwards. So one might argue that civic service, that eventually that breeds and fosters people to make those jumps to go up. So hopefully that would be the case. But they make this very clear distinction between politics and civil service. And there's no like crossing over for them, and maybe it's just kind of their time of their age and kind of where they're at. But for them, there's this very like strict barrier.
I think politics is seen as very negative here by young people. I mean, as very toxic, and I think people think they can do more and have more social change outside of politics. So yeah, I think it's global.
Right. It might be something we're starting to see more as our cynicism gets higher. I think people detract from politics more because they say, oh, it's so awful, I'm just going to go do something else because I don't want to, penetrate the system and get in there because it's so terrible. So maybe it's something we're starting to see as a result of our cynicism getting much higher, which we all know is probably happening, especially here. That's probably a result of that, is because of the cynicism, it drives people into the civil service. Michael.
Oh, I was wondering, you interviewing people from several different countries, several different cultures.
Right.
Did you detect any differences in the expectations people had about politics? Because cynicism certainly would be derived in relationship to what they expect or what they might hope for.
Right, so the question was is there
any cultural differences?
Cultural differences, yeah.
Did you sense any of that?
The cultural differences came out more in their construction of gender barriers and the gender barriers that existed within their particular countries. So that got fleshed out a lot more because they would talk about their expectations, what their family expectations were, what their personal expectations were. So more of the culture aspect came out in gender. Universally, their construction, how they viewed politics was that they should serve the people and they aren't. Just to kind of boil it down to a simple statement would be the government should be helping the people and they aren't. So that was kind of universal. I don't think there were a lot of cultural differences as far as their view on politics, except that they should serve the people and they did not view that they were. But those cultural differences definitely came out in the gender barriers and their expectations or what they thought the barriers were for their participation in politics. Kathy.
What, as for some of these countries that you studied, what is because in America there's a low percentage of women office in the Senate and that sort of thing. What is the percentage of women? Because I know some of the countries you mentioned have actually had female prime ministers or leaders. We've never had like a female president. So what is their percentage of women involved?
That's a good question. I don't have the percentage on me, but they all have quotas, which we do not have. So all those countries have political quotas, so there is that. But they are also, like 4 of them are ranked higher than we are on the national scale. Like we're 65 now, I think, or 64. And several of these, like even Afghanistan, because of their quota, is higher in the percentage of female participation than we are. Yeah. Barbara.
Based on the quotes, it seems like these young women were very candid and comfortable with you. Was there any fear? Did you start any interviews and then they felt uncomfortable talking about their situation?
That's a great question. I was there the first week of the Institute. Each year my role was a little different, but I was always there that first week, and I tried to capture the interviews the first week, and then I also did follow-up surveys at the end, and I usually was around the whole kind of in and out throughout. But they, most of them, some countries, Mongolia particularly, was a little bit more hesitant to kind of talk openly about politics in their country. Morocco was very eager usually to talk about it. Most of the women were pretty passionate and wanted to share, but Mongolia was probably the one country that they were a little bit more reserved in, but never really fearful. But yeah, that's a good question. Jim.
Can you talk a little bit about the media and those bananas?
Yeah.
And are there different biases that they're able to digest? Or is that more, I guess the question is, how does their media affect the way they understand politics versus?
Right. Their constructions of the media was that they just don't tell the whole truth, right? That they're only sharing parts of it, or they completely kind of put a smoke over it to make it not as bad as it is. So not lying, they wouldn't say lying, but they would say it's kind of a smokescreen. Like they didn't know all the information. They only had like puzzle pieces to figure things out. So they didn't have like fake news maybe like we have, but more of they're not telling the whole story, or they're making it sound better than it really is. So I think that kind of transparency is something that we don't see a lot in American political cynicism per se, because we kind of feel like we know what's going on. So that's something that's a little bit more unique to Mamiapez, is that transparency. They don't feel like they're getting the full story. That stuff's missing, or they don't really know all of it.
Does social media play a better role as far as educating us?
Yeah, exactly. Most of the women, and I didn't talk about it today, but they would follow up with, I get all my news from social media because that's where the real stuff is happening, right? Facebook, Twitter. And so they were more likely to rely on that, especially in Egypt, because the year I interviewed them was during the revolution. So it was 2013 when Egypt was part of it. And so for them particularly, they were getting their information from Twitter and from Facebook, because they said the news channels were biased, or they would only show a particular agenda. So they were more likely, to get their information from social media.
Terri. Actually, I have a twofold question. Let's go back to quotas. Out of curiosity, did you actually ask a pointed question about quotas and how they perceive the power women have versus their overall cynicism towards politics of their individual countries?
Right, so the question was if I asked them specifically about quotas, and I did. I asked them how they felt about quotas and what was their perception of, did that help increase women's political involvement in their countries? And generally, almost all of them had very negative views of quotas. They thought that quotas were not efficient or effective, and they thought that it was just a way to get women into the system, but they weren't the good women that they would say. And that was their characterization, is a lot, and in some of these countries, such as India and Pakistan, for example, a lot of their political families are at play. So if you're not part of a political family, it's harder to get involved. But so a lot of them had very negative feelings about quotas. There were maybe just a few that thought it was a good idea, but generally they had very negative feelings about quotas, as far as they didn't think the right people were getting in there, and they were just putting people in there because they had the quota.
Do they even feel those, and that is really a bigger question, do they feel that there was a decision-making being made by women? So when the guys were getting together and making whatever decisions they were making in their little, enclaves,
Right.
were the women having some influence in any of the voting or lawmaking?
That kind of differed. It didn't flesh that one out a whole lot, but what did kind of emerge was two things. One, the women were there, but maybe they didn't really get a say. They were kind of just at the table, but not participating. And then the second was that the women were kind of, one of them referred to as puppets of the man. So like the woman who was the quota was actually it was her husband that was kind of pulling the strings, and it was the husband that was kind of his political motivation. So it wasn't necessarily her, but generally, it was kind of one of those kind of two things. But there were statements of women who were part of quotas that they did talk about, like India and Pakistan referenced a couple women that were part of that. But generally, overall, they did not have very positive feelings about that.
And so the second question, which might be a little bit unfair because of your sample, but could you define some examples of civic positions of power, because they differ. It depends on what enclave you're talking about, right. Regions of different countries.
Right. I think for them, a lot of them would say civic service, and they meant NGOs or organizations like that were not part of the government, just community-based organizations, much local level type things that they could get involved with. A lot of them were had started their own little organizations and had started small nonprofits that they were working on. So it would definitely be something that is more on the local scale and something within their community.
And the issues that they were interested in,
Yeah, so that's a good question. As part of the Women's Leadership Institute, they all came with an issue that they wanted to focus on during their time here, and they did a Leadership for Change project where they worked through that issue to kind of come up with a plan proposal, so when they go home, they could implement their proposal and their plan. And most of them revolved around education, women's women's rights, children's rights, abuse, things like that. So those were kind of the main themes. Tended to do with that because they are coming from State Department deemed at risk for women's issues countries. Jim.
Can you talk a little bit more about the representations of your sample, because you're interviewing people in their early 20s. I remember at the end of the Cold War, there were all these predictions about how great the future was going to be with government because Soviet Union was collapsing, South Africa was getting rid of apartheid, democracy was just everywhere. And about the time when this generation is being born, all of that's happening. And since then, you're describing something to me that seems very new. Do you think if you interviewed people in their 40s, 50s, older, that the answers would be different, or what do you think?
Answers to what?
To the questions that you were asking
Right.
this particular group.
Well, what we're seeing is that I would say probably yes, that would probably be true. But the more cynical, we're starting to see that the younger we go, the more cynical it gets, probably because of the situation. So I definitely think that would probably be fair to say that an older sample, you would get a different view on politics because of the different lived experience that they have. So I would anticipate that would probably be different. I think the trend that we're starting to see is as we go younger generations, it gets more and more cynical.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's lots of reasons for that, but I think a lot of people are not seeing that their governments are getting things done. For the women, they don't view them as effective because they don't feel like their governments are doing things, or they're not doing things for the people. So for them, that cynicism is because they don't see anything impact to them. They're not seeing any beneficial impact to them that their government is doing for them. So maybe it's more of an individual, like, I don't think my government's doing anything for me, so I don't view it as being a positive thing. Those millennials, who knows, you know.
Okay, so we start with the observation that let's say some politics and so on. So presumably that means they're more interested, more households. So would this be, in your opinion, or your subject's opinion, because they're less cynical, or because they're more willing to pursue political careers for self-gain?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to that, and we're going to talk about some of that on Thursday. But so a lot of that we'll kind of talk about ambition. But the big difference in ambition for men and women is that men just kind of will do things even if they overcompensate their confidence, whereas women, we criticize our confidence and we're like, maybe I can't do it. So the confidence level definitely boosts the participation, and men tend to be much more overzealous in that regard. So ambition levels are different, and also we find that men are usually the ones encouraged to run for office. Like, people go up to them and say, hey Dennis, you should run for faculty senate or faculty association president, and then you do. But women are not. Women need to be encouraged to run for political office, and we find that they're not as encouraged as men typically are. But there's a lot going on in the ambition, and then probably women don't feel like they're as knowledgeable about politics, so that's probably another barrier because they question their knowledge about politics, and that's something we'll talk about next week too, is that they don't think that they're capable or able to do it, and so they question more, whereas again, men tend to be a little bit more robust in their confidence when it comes to that. So good, yeah, good question.
Ashley, did any of the participants express a distinction between the types of government? So were they more favorable towards city or local or regional or national, or they're all different?
You know, those distinctions didn't really get flushed out a lot of times. I think they were usually thinking of the national government. Some would make reference to regional governments, but generally their remarks were more on the national scale, and that's what we were kind of talking about. So, but some would make comments about like mayors, as we asked many questions about women or in different lower levels. Those discussions would happen, but generally it was more on the national level, and they kind of just thought it all was bad, but definitely more on the national level. It was more bad than the lower levels. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Oh,
No, was there any positive comments from?
yes. So today's was a little bit more depressing than next week's. It definitely, since cynicism was the overall kind of barrier and also the motivation for like gender barriers, there was positive comments, and we'll get to the more positive stuff next week. The happy days. But what they did talk about, I think, which is inspiring, is that they are interested in the civic service. They just don't want to be part generally of politics because it's dirty, but the civic service is kind of where it's at. So I think if we leave with a little bit of hope, it's at least that they do have that desire, and most of them are still very involved in their communities back home and doing great things. So I think that's hopeful. It's just they view politics as this awful, dirty, don't want to touch it kind of thing, which I think is how most people might feel even here in this room as well.
So come to the co-lab next Thursday at 11 for some hope.
For happier talk, yes.
And maybe we can I'll go downstairs and have some refreshments and keep the conversation going.
Great, thank you.